I remember that morning with a clarity I can't shake, though I've tried. September 11th, 2001. I was in the financial district of Manhattan, an ordinary morning, the kind where you follow your routine without thinking twice. Coffee from the corner shop, a quick word with the receptionist, the elevator ride up to my office. The sun had just begun to filter through the early fall sky, crisp and clear, completely ordinary. The streets were already humming with people like me, walking briskly, briefcases in hand, earbuds or cell phones in place, unaware that the world would fracture in the next hour. I remember stepping out of the elevator on the 94th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center, greeting a few colleagues, glancing down at the view I had seen hundreds of times, the Hudson, the East River, the rooftops of buildings I had grown used to, and feeling a subtle, ordinary satisfaction in the normality of it all. Then the first explosion hit. Not a distant sound, not a muffled crash. A reverberation that shook the floor and the glass around me, the lights flickering violently, coffee cups sliding across desks. At first, no one knew what had happened. People froze. I froze. I remember looking toward the windows, feeling my stomach drop because the entire world outside seemed wrong. Then someone screamed, and the building itself seemed to groan. Paper and debris fell from the ceilings, and a choking cloud of dust began to fill the air, carrying a strange, acrid smell that burned my lungs as I inhaled reflexively. My instincts screamed to move, to leave, but the stairwells were already crowded, chaos rippling like water, each step a fight against panic. People were screaming, crying, shouting names, and through it all I kept telling myself, just get out, stay calm, keep moving. I was headed down when the second plane hit the North Tower. I didn't see it directly, but the explosion, the shock wave, the reverberation through the ground beneath my feet made it impossible to ignore. At that moment, my understanding of ordinary life, the way mornings were supposed to feel, shattered completely. Floors below me started collapsing. Smoke and fire surged up through shafts and hallways. My vision blurred from dust and adrenaline. People were falling, screaming, bumping into me, and I remember gripping the wall, telling myself over and over, just breathe, just survive. Then came the moment I remember most clearly, the moment that has never left me, the collapse of the South Tower itself. 1 second, the floor beneath me trembled as if the building were testing its own strength. The next, the ceiling above fell away, chunks of concrete and metal raining down, walls folding, windows shattering. The sound, a grinding, unrelenting roar, was so massive it seemed to push against the air itself, and I was thrown, tumbling into darkness, into a cloud of dust, debris, and confusion. For hours, or maybe minutes, I had no concept of time. I was trapped beneath layers of steel, concrete, and dust. My world shrank to the smell of dust in my nose, the pain in my ribs, the scrape of jagged metal against my leg, the faint light that filtered through cracks above me. And in that moment, something else hit me. I was alone. No one around me, no voices, just silence punctuated by distant groans of the building, occasional cries that faded too quickly to identify. At first, I could not move. My leg was pinned, one arm trapped beneath a beam. Every attempt caused pain that made me gasp, but I forced myself to try, because the alternative, giving up, was unthinkable. My hands scraped against rubble, sharp edges cutting into skin, and I realized that if I was going to survive, I had to ignore everything else. The fear, the smoke, the uncertainty. I focused entirely on tiny movements, inch by inch, freeing my arm enough to breathe better, wiggling my torso to get more space. And then came the sound that almost broke me. A faint tapping somewhere above me. A voice. I called out, hoarse, barely audible through the dust. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My own voice sounded foreign, swallowed by the cavern of wreckage surrounding me. No response, just silence. I tried again, louder. Nothing. That's when the gravity of the situation truly set in. I was buried under the World Trade Center, one of thousands trapped or lost, and I had no way to know if anyone would find me. Time became impossible to measure. Seconds stretched into hours, hours into eternity. I had only fragments to hold on to, the feel of debris against my skin, the faint light that occasionally seeped through cracks, the sound of distant movement. Or was it my imagination? I counted silently to keep my mind from unraveling, repeating small rituals, whispering my own name over and over. Every sound above me, every shift in the rubble, made my pulse spike. I remember thinking, if anyone hears me, if anyone comes, I will survive. I will get out. And I clung to that thought like a lifeline, not knowing that days would pass before I would see daylight again. The first thing I noticed after the initial collapse was silence, or at least the kind of silence that presses on your chest. The world I had known was gone, replaced by a gray, choking tomb of concrete, steel, and dust. My ears rang from the roar, my body ached in ways I didn't know possible, and every instinct screamed at me to move, to survive, to fight my way out. I realized almost immediately that I couldn't get out. The debris pinned me in place. My legs were trapped beneath a twisted steel beam, and one arm was caught under a slab of concrete. The initial adrenaline that had carried me through the collapse was fading, replaced by a sharp, gnawing panic. I tried to focus. Small movements, inch by inch, tested what I could free. Every scrape, every cut, every bruise was amplified by the fact that I couldn't stretch fully. Dust filled my lungs and coated my throat, making each breath a conscious effort. I realized that I needed to ration my strength. Panic would get me nowhere. I whispered to myself over and over, small phrases like, "You can do this. You're still alive. Just breathe." They sounded ridiculous in the isolation of that pile, but they anchored me to reality, to the fragile certainty that I was still here. Time became meaningless. I had no idea if it was minutes or hours. I could hear distant noises above me sometimes, a groan of shifting metal, a muffled shout, a hammering that might have been a rescue crew, or it might have been my imagination. I tried calling out, my voice cracking, hoarse, barely carrying through the thick layers of concrete above. "Hello, is anyone there?" I shouted again and again until my throat burned. Sometimes I thought I heard a response, a faint echo, a tap, a vibration, and it gave me hope. Sometimes it was nothing, and despair clawed at my chest like a living thing. Food and water were impossible. I had nothing. I tried to conserve energy, moving only when necessary. The air grew hotter during the day, colder at night, if night existed in the darkness surrounding me. My mind clung to fragments of routine, counting the seconds between shifts in the rubble, memorizing the weight of the beam that pinned me, mentally repeating the names of my family, the office, even trivial things like the color of my coffee cup that morning. These tiny anchors kept my sanity tethered to a world that no longer existed around me. Pain became a constant companion. My ribs throbbed from being compressed, cuts and abrasions stung from rough concrete, and my head ached from the dust and the stress. I began to hallucinate, small things at first, shadows that weren't there, voices that weren't real, but I clung to them when they seemed to indicate life. Every imagined movement above me became a possible rescue. Every tiny scrape of metal or shifting dust became a potential path to freedom. I began to think about the people I loved, the family I might never see again, and the colleagues who must have been lost around me. Guilt and fear intertwined, creating a suffocating weight heavier than the debris pressing down. I promised myself that if I survived, I would remember every detail, every face, every sound, and that promise became a lifeline. Days passed. I have no exact count. Hours blended together. I learned to conserve breath, to whisper when I called out, to make every movement count. My body began to accept the rhythm of the debris around me. I could sense when a shift of rubble was close or when dust above me had settled, almost as if the building itself had become a living entity I had to study to survive. Then, faintly, the first sound of life broke through. A scraping, a thud, voices. My heart raced beyond control. I screamed, hoarse and raw, over and over, until I thought my lungs might give out. And then I heard it. A voice, distant but unmistakable. "Are you alive? Can you hear us?" The words were fractured, but they were real. I answered, every ounce of strength I could summon. "Yes, I'm here." That first contact was more than relief. It was the first confirmation that the nightmare I was living could end. But hope also brought terror. I didn't know if I could survive extraction. I was fragile, trapped, and in pain. I had no idea what lay above the rubble or how the rescuers would reach me. Yet, as distant voices called back, I realized something crucial. I was not invisible anymore. Someone knew I was alive. That knowledge, small as it was, became the oxygen I didn't have. Hours passed before hands finally reached me, digging through rubble, carefully lifting debris, guiding me toward light. Every movement was agonizing, every scrape of metal against skin a reminder of the fragility of life. Yet step by step, I was freed from the tomb. The dust burned my eyes, the sun seared my face, and I could barely breathe from the weight of everything I had endured. But I was alive, and in that moment, I understood that survival wasn't about luck alone. It was about noticing the tiniest gaps, clinging to hope, and refusing to surrender to silence. When they finally pulled me from the wreckage, it was like surfacing from a nightmare I couldn't escape. My body was numb from days of immobility, bruised, scraped, and coated in a thick layer of dust that filled every pore. My lungs burned from inhaling smoke, concrete particles, and ash for hours, though I could barely count how many. The light was blinding at first, stark, unfiltered sunlight cutting through the haze of the city, and I remember instinctively closing my eyes, not out of pain, but out of disbelief. I had been alive in the darkness for so long that daylight itself felt like an intruder. The rescuers were calm, professional, their voices steady as they guided me out from beneath the steel and concrete. But I was too weak to process much. Every movement was agony, every breath, every shift of a limb, every minor adjustment sending bolts of pain through my bruised body. Yet I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Control. The tiniest, most basic control over my own movements, over my own survival. I whispered my thanks, though my voice was cracked and strange to me, and they responded with quiet nods and practical instructions. "We've got you. Stay with us. You're safe now." As they carried me away, I caught my first clear glimpse of what the city had become. The streets were unrecognizable, vehicles burned, debris scattered across avenues, paper and ash drifting in the air like snow, pedestrians wandering in stunned silence. Smoke rose in thick columns from the towers that remained, and the skyline I had known my entire life had been permanently altered in moments. I realized then that my survival, as miraculous as it was, existed alongside the deaths of thousands. I could not reconcile my relief with the horror around me. At the triage area, medical personnel swarmed, checking vitals, giving oxygen, cleaning wounds. Every touch, every movement reminded me how vulnerable I had been. And yet, even in this controlled environment, the sense of isolation lingered. I had been buried, alone, surrounded by dust and rubble, and now, standing in the makeshift medical area amid hundreds of others, I felt a similar detachment. I kept glancing at the faces of survivors, recognizing the same shock and disbelief mirrored in every set of eyes. Some cried quietly, others whispered frantic questions to loved ones, many simply stared into nothing. It was a landscape of trauma, and I realized horrifyingly that I had barely begun to process what had occurred. The rescuers explained that I had been trapped for more than 3 days. 3 days beneath a tower, pinned under debris, with little water, no food, and only the faintest fragments of sound above me to anchor reality. I felt stunned at first, unable to comprehend that time had passed in such a surreal way. Memory of the collapse and the darkness blended into a continuous haze. Hours, minutes, days, they all bled together. And yet, here I was, standing, breathing, and alive, while countless others were not. That juxtaposition struck me with a weight I can still feel today, the bittersweet, cruel reality of survival. Later, as I was moved to a temporary shelter for the injured, I had my first real opportunity to take in the scope of the disaster. The area surrounding the towers was unrecognizable. Dust coated every surface like a second skin. Steel and concrete protruded from shattered foundations. Smoke continued to rise in the distance. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles lined the streets, while volunteers and civilians moved cautiously through the wreckage, helping where they could. The chaos of the previous days persisted, but now it was layered with a grim sense of order, as if the city itself were learning to adapt to the unthinkable. I remember sitting on a cot, wrapped in a blanket, trying to clean myself as best I could, when a paramedic spoke quietly. He told me I had been incredibly lucky, that survival in such conditions was rare, and that the rescue teams had been searching tirelessly. The words made sense rationally, but they could not reach the part of me that had been buried, alone, and fighting for every breath. That part still lingered in the crevices of my mind, replaying the silence, the pressure, the absolute stillness that had surrounded me. I realized then that surviving did not erase the trauma. It simply gave it space to expand, to grow, to integrate itself into everything I would see and feel from that day forward. And through it all, the memory of being trapped beneath the tower remained visceral. The sound of shifting debris, the oppressive weight, the sensation of being buried alive, it became a measure against which all subsequent fears were compared. Every moment after that day, every emergency, every crisis was filtered through the lens of what it felt like to lie immobilized, uncertain if I would breathe again. The collapse, the dust, the darkness, they had not just injured me physically. They had altered my perception of the world. Even as I sat in the shelter, receiving care and listening to news broadcasts describing the full scale of the attacks, I realized something else. Survival was only part of the story. I had survived, yes, but there were thousands who had not. The faces, the bodies, the families. Their absence was a shadow that followed me, an invisible weight that would never lift. And so, as the world tried to piece itself back together, I began the harder task, piecing myself back together, carrying the memory of days buried beneath a tower, and living with the understanding that life can be cruelly arbitrary, that survival is never a guarantee, and that witnessing history firsthand is a gift and a curse at the same time. After the initial shock of rescue, the world I returned to was unrecognizable, not because the city had changed, it had, but because the person I was had been fundamentally altered. The medical staff helped me physically. Bandages, stitches, IVs, and painkillers. Every touch reminded me of how fragile my body had become, how every movement was measured against the memory of being trapped beneath debris. I could eat only small amounts at a time. Water burned my throat. Sleep was impossible without the echoes of dust and metal rattling through my mind. Even breathing was a reminder of what I had survived and what I had been denied for days. The first night at home after release from the hospital was the hardest. I walked through familiar rooms, expecting comfort, but found none. Everything seemed amplified. The quiet hum of the refrigerator sounded like distant thunder. The shadows in the corners of the living room seemed larger, alive. I lay in bed, expecting sleep to soothe me, but it didn't. Every memory of the tower's collapse, the weight pressing on me, the darkness closing in, replayed in vivid loops. My body was free, but my mind was still buried. I could still feel the steel against my ribs, the concrete pressing on my legs, the dust coating every inch of me. Friends and family were relieved to see me alive, but their relief sometimes felt alien. They had not been under the debris. They had not tasted the uncertainty of life's fragility. They could not understand why I woke in the night, drenched in sweat, or why I flinched at sudden noises, or why the memory of falling glass and steel haunted my dreams. I tried to explain, but words were inadequate. The terror, the silence, the oppressive isolation, none of it could be fully conveyed. Even the simplest questions about the day of the attack became impossible to answer without feeling the weight of everyone who had not survived. Recovery was slow. Physically, I healed, though scars and aches remained to this day. But the mental recovery lagged far behind. Flashbacks came without warning. The roar of collapsing buildings, the crackling of fire, the suffocating dust. Sometimes while walking through crowded streets, I imagined the streets cracking open beneath me, debris falling, and instinctively I would freeze, caught between panic and rational thought. I avoided elevators, confined spaces, and even tall buildings for months. The world felt less stable, less predictable. The city that had been familiar and ordered now seemed fragile, impermanent, ready to collapse at any moment. Therapy helped in part. I spoke with counselors who had experience with trauma survivors, and they taught me techniques to ground myself in the present. Breathing exercises, visualization, and repetition of ordinary routines helped ease the worst of the panic. But no method could erase the memory, could not undo the days spent buried under a tower, could not recreate the people I saw fall or the silence that followed. I learned to live alongside the trauma, integrating it into a life that otherwise went on. And yet, there was a strange, persistent guilt that followed me. Survivor's guilt, they called it. I had lived while so many perished. I had survived because of circumstances, luck, the tiniest gaps of debris and timing. The thought that thousands of others had no chance haunted me relentlessly. I found myself scrutinizing news articles, missing person reports, interviews with first responders. I wanted to understand why some survived while others didn't, but logic offered no answers, only arbitrary patterns that could not reconcile with the human tragedy unfolding around me. Friends began asking how I could stand to revisit the area, to watch documentaries, to attend memorials. I didn't know at first, but I realized I had to face the destruction repeatedly, or it would consume me silently. The first visit back to Ground Zero was surreal. The city was still scarred, the streets still uneven, the skeletal remains of buildings cleared but imprinted in my memory. Standing there, looking at the memorials, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow so profound that it was almost physical. I wanted to scream my thanks to the rescuers who pulled me out, to mourn those who never returned, and to reconcile the simultaneous fragility and resilience of life itself. I also began noticing subtle triggers in everyday life: a falling object, a loud crash, the sound of sirens. All jolted me back into that buried place. I realized survival is not merely emerging from danger, but learning to inhabit life after danger, to navigate a world where memory can ambush you at any moment. Over time, I found small routines that helped anchor me: checking stairwells and exits, walking with awareness, being mindful of surroundings. Ordinary precautions became rituals, not out of paranoia, but because the body remembers what the mind cannot erase. Even now, I sometimes close my eyes and feel the weight of those 3 days, the texture of the dust, the pressure of concrete, the darkness that was both physical and mental. But I also remember the sound of voices calling to me, the hands that lifted debris away, the first glimpse of sunlight after entombment. These memories are inseparable: terror and relief, despair and hope, death and life, and they define every day since. Survival, I learned, is not just about escaping harm. It is about enduring the psychological aftermath, confronting trauma, and navigating a world that has moved on while carrying the memory of those who did not. And perhaps, most profoundly, it is about remembering that ordinary life can fracture in an instant, and that even in the shadow of disaster, persistence, no matter how small, can pull you back into the light. Returning to what used to feel normal was a strange and often painful process. The city had begun to heal on the surface: streets cleared, debris removed, businesses reopening, the skyline altered but alive. But for me, the mental and emotional cleanup was far slower and far more complicated. Every morning felt like a negotiation with reality, a test to see if the day would overwhelm me with memories I could not control. Even small routines, which had once felt ordinary, now carried weight. Walking into an elevator, hearing the faint hum of construction nearby, or even smelling the dust in a subway station could trigger a flashback to being trapped beneath the debris. I tried to return to work, to reconnect with colleagues, but everything felt different. The offices where we had once shared idle conversation now seemed like hollow reminders of a world that could be so suddenly taken away. I noticed details I had never paid attention to before. The stability of the floors beneath my feet, the width of stairwells, the accessibility of exits. Every step through these spaces was measured against memory. I realized that survival had rewritten my perception, that ordinary spaces could never feel completely safe again. Social interactions were equally complicated. Friends and family were deeply relieved that I had survived, but their relief carried an unspoken expectation that life should return to normal. I couldn't explain that normal no longer existed for me, that the memories of dust, steel, and darkness had become an inseparable layer over the world I had known. Attempts to describe the experience often failed. Words felt inadequate to communicate the magnitude of trauma, the claustrophobic fear, the helplessness that had defined those 3 days buried beneath the tower. People tried to comfort me, sometimes awkwardly, and I appreciated it, but I knew that nothing could truly bridge the gap between their understanding and what I had lived. Sleep was perhaps the hardest aspect of recovery. For months, I battled nightmares, vivid, unrelenting, a replay of the collapse and the darkness, only sometimes blended with imagined horrors that intensified the trauma. I woke in a sweat, heart pounding, often in the same physical positions that had helped me survive entombment. I learned techniques to calm myself, breathing exercises, visualization, grounding myself with objects in the room. Still, even years later, I'm sometimes awakened by the echo of falling steel, by the memory of being pinned beneath the weight of concrete and dust. Sleep became both a necessity and a battlefield. There was also survivor's guilt, a constant, gnawing companion. I survived while thousands did not. Every story of loss on the news, every mention of a missing coworker, every family torn apart. It all reminded me that my survival was almost random, a product of circumstances I could not control. I began volunteering at memorial events, sharing my experience when appropriate, trying to give voice to those who had perished. It was both cathartic and excruciating, as each story I heard echoed the helplessness I had felt beneath the rubble. Over time, I learned to live with the trauma, not to overcome it entirely, because some scars can never fully fade. Daily life demanded attention and participation, yet every action was shadowed by memory. I started to notice subtle triggers, the sound of a metallic scrape on concrete, the sudden shout of a passerby, the distant rumble of construction, all capable of pulling me back into the days buried beneath the tower. I trained myself to recognize these moments, to breathe, to remind myself that I was no longer trapped. But the mind is persistent, and memories have a way of resurfacing, even decades later, as if to remind you that survival carries a cost beyond the physical. I also found that revisiting Ground Zero, attending memorials, and speaking with first responders and survivors helped shape a perspective I could carry with me. There was solace in shared experience, in witnessing how a city and its people rebuilt, not just physically, but emotionally. But it never erased the days spent trapped, the moments of isolation, the uncertainty of life and death compressed into hours that felt like weeks. I learned that healing is not linear. It comes in fits and starts, in small victories, and in quiet acceptance that some things will always remain part of you. Even now, decades later, I carry the memory like a second skin. The world has continued on, the skyline has shifted, and new generations have grown up unaware of what happened on those September mornings. But the memory of being buried, of being pulled into light after days of darkness, remains vivid. It informs my decisions, my routines, my awareness of mortality and fragility. Survival is a gift, yes, but it is also a burden, a constant reminder that the ordinary can vanish in a heartbeat, and that life, once taken for granted, is far more precious and tenuous than I ever realized. Years passed, but the memory of those 3 days buried beneath the South Tower never loosened its grip. Physically, I had healed. Scars had faded, bruises disappeared, and my body had regained its strength. But psychologically, the collapse and entrapment remained a shadow I carried in every thought, every decision. Even simple, ordinary routines could trigger an involuntary recall of the terror. Walking into a crowded building, hearing a sudden loud noise, stepping into an elevator. The mind has an uncanny way of translating past trauma into present caution, and mine had become hyper-aware of spaces, of exits, of risks invisible to anyone else. Sleep continued to be both a refuge and a battlefield. Nightmares resurfaced at unpredictable intervals, vivid reconstructions of the collapse, the shifting weight of debris, the suffocating dust, and the echoes of those who had not survived. Sometimes I would wake gasping, my body convinced I was still trapped, even though I lay safely in bed. It was in these moments I realized how deeply the experience had infiltrated my perception of the world, how trauma could extend beyond time and physical confinement to reshape the way I lived every waking hour. The survivor's guilt remained constant. I had emerged while thousands did not. Each news report of lives lost, each story of families broken by the attack, was a reminder that my presence was an anomaly. I tried to make sense of why I had survived while others had perished. Rational explanations, timing, luck, position, rescue, could only go so far. Emotionally, there was no calculus to justify survival. Instead, I focused on remembering, on preserving the memory of those who did not make it, as though acknowledgement could in some way honor their absence. Returning to work and social routines proved challenging. I found myself hyper-aware of every structural detail in buildings, stairwell widths, fire exits, elevator capacity. Crowded spaces were anxiety-inducing, not just for comfort, but because memory had taught me that disaster could strike at any moment. Conversations with friends and colleagues often skirted around the topic of 9/11. People wanted to move on, to embrace normalcy. I wanted that too, but moving on felt like betrayal. Each day I carried the dual weight of gratitude for survival and sorrow for the countless lives extinguished around me. Therapy helped, but it could not erase the trauma. It offered tools for living alongside it. Grounding techniques, mindfulness, and structured reflection allowed me to function in everyday life, but the emotional residue remained. I noticed subtle triggers, a sudden loud noise, a metallic clatter, even the smell of dust or smoke. Each instance was a flashback, a reminder that the danger I survived was real and immediate, not distant. In time, I learned to anticipate these moments, to breathe, to remind myself that I was no longer trapped beneath debris. But anticipation is not eradication, and the shadow of memory was always there. I also came to understand the depth of collective trauma. Returning to ground zero, attending memorials, and speaking with fellow survivors reinforced the magnitude of what had happened. The loss was unfathomable, and yet life continued. I realized that survival did not exist in isolation. It came with responsibility, to remember, to bear witness, and to honor those who were gone. That responsibility became a guiding principle, shaping my interactions, my reflections, and my sense of purpose. Ultimately, I realized that the world I had known before September 11th no longer existed, not in the city, not in society, and certainly not within myself. Survival was a gift, yes, but it was inseparable from the knowledge of mortality and impermanence. Every day was a negotiation with memory and presence, an effort to find equilibrium between life and the enduring shadow of loss. The collapse had changed everything: how I viewed the city, how I viewed people, how I viewed myself. And though decades have passed, the memory remains as vivid as the day I first emerged into the light, reminding me that life can be shattered in an instant, and that the weight of survival can be heavier than the rubble that once held you. Even decades later, the memory of being trapped beneath the South Tower is never far from me. The world has moved on. New buildings have risen, new generations have grown, and life continues as though the towers never fell. But for those of us who were there, who survived, the day remains carved into our minds in vivid detail. It is a constant presence, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming, reminding us that life is fragile, that ordinary moments can vanish in an instant, and that survival carries both relief and burden. Returning to a sense of normalcy was never simple. I have walked through office buildings, public spaces, and crowded streets countless times since that day. But the awareness I carry is permanent. I notice every exit, every potential hazard, every detail most people overlook. It is not paranoia. It is memory insisting on vigilance, a psychological imprint left by being so close to death. Even now, loud noises, sudden movements, or the faint smell of dust can trigger flashes of what I endured, a visceral reminder of the fragility of life and the randomness of survival. I have learned to live with this duality, gratitude and sorrow, relief and guilt. Survivor's guilt never fully disappears. I carry the faces of those who did not make it, the lives abruptly cut short, and the families shattered in the aftermath. Each memory is a silent weight I bear, balanced by the knowledge that I was fortunate, that I had the chance to tell this story, to honor the lives lost, and to remind others of the fragility and preciousness of existence. The act of remembering has become a responsibility, a way of ensuring that those who perished are not forgotten. Over time, I have found small rituals that anchor me, visiting memorials, participating in remembrance events, and quietly reflecting on the people I saw, the lives I touched, and the strangers who, through acts of bravery, rescued me. These practices are not cathartic in the way one might hope. They do not erase trauma, but they provide perspective, structure, and a sense of purpose in the midst of a memory that can be both relentless and isolating. I also think about the fragility of everyday life. Before that day, I moved through the city, the world, without considering mortality. After being trapped, that awareness became unavoidable. Life is no longer a series of ordinary routines. Each day carries the weight of what could have been lost. Decisions are sharper, moments are more deliberate, and every human connection feels more precious. The memory of entrapment beneath the tower has made ordinary existence more vivid, more meaningful, even as it reminds me constantly of its impermanence. And yet, amidst the trauma, I have learned resilience. Survival has shaped me in ways that are impossible to quantify, but undeniable in effect. I can endure stress, navigate fear, and find clarity in moments of chaos because I have been tested beyond ordinary limits. I have also learned the value of presence, of being fully aware, fully engaged, fully grateful for life, even when it is painful. That awareness, born of disaster, has been a gift, if a cruel and heavy one. In the end, living with the weight of survival is not about triumph or forgetting. It is about coexistence with memory, a balance between mourning what was lost and honoring the life that remains. It is about recognizing that ordinary days are extraordinary simply because we exist in them. And every time I look at the skyline, the streets, the rebuilt towers, I am reminded of that day, of the fragility of life, of the courage of strangers, and of the extraordinary resilience required to move forward while carrying the echo of something so unimaginable. Survival is not a simple story. It is layered with complexity, memory, guilt, and gratitude. I am alive because of circumstances, chance, and human effort. And every day since has been a negotiation between the past beneath the rubble and the present that continues, reminding me that the weight of survival is both a burden and a gift, and that living fully is the only way to honor both the lost and the saved.